Hello and welcome into this edition of the Golf Channel podcast with Rex and Lav. Rex is coming to you live from Scotland, right over his left shoulder. Yes, that is the 18th green at Gull number 2. Fantastic golf course. He can't wait to share his travel nightmare with you. But first, it was a very wild day on C-SPAN with an occasionally maddening good cop, bad cop routine between Senators Blumenthal and Johnson during a nearly 3-hour hearing for the permanent subcommittee on investigations. But perhaps more importantly, there was a 275-page document dump basically detailing the negotiations that led to the definitive agreement between the PGA Tour and the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia that was announced on June 6th. Rex, you were apparently not geo-blocked from listening in on the hearing despite being 3,500 miles away. What was your big takeaway?
3,500 miles, 30,000 feet in the air. I actually listened to not all of it because it lasted nearly 3 hours, but a good portion of the hearing on the flight from Paris to Edinburgh. We'll get into all the flight stuff later. Listen to the second half of it on my drive from Edinburgh to Gullin. So there was a lot going on, but I did get the gist of it. I guess my biggest takeaway, and I was just kind of reaching out, texting some players, seeing what their reaction is.
Were they sitting down for the whole 3-hour thing, Rex?
No, but I will tell you this, that I was pretty surprised that 2 of the 5 players that I reached out got back to me immediately and said that, yep, we'd seen it. And this was our take. And it was interesting. I think they were very supportive of what Jimmy Dunn and Ron Price sort of laid out. Like, look, this is, and I think Jimmy Dunn's line that I kept coming back to, which I thought was interesting, was sunshine is a great disinfectant. So the more and more people find out about this, and the more and more people find out of how much trouble the tour was in, for Jimmy Dunn to make a comment like the way they were picking off players in
the
5
tour
years.
the LIV lit us on fire was
Yes.
one of the most memorable sound bites.
I mean, for him to lay it out like that, you start getting an idea that, number one, I think that there was a real concern there. And once you start digging through those documents, and it was 260 something pages, so I'm only kind of halfway there. But once you start digging through those documents, you get an idea of how aggressively the PIF and Yasser and that side came at the tour. They came at them with fully baked, fully fledged ideas of, okay, Rory and Tiger are going to own a team, and we're going to get the LPGA involved, and it's going to be 10 events, and then we're going to have a big finish. They didn't come with sort of just as what we're dealing with now, what we're talking about now, which is a framework agreement. I mean, PIF came to Jimmy Dunn and the PGA Tour and Ed Hurley with just a fully cooked, this is what we absolutely want, which in my mind is interesting going forward, because it sounds to me as if the policy board has already kind of been given something closer to whatever's going to be the final version, and we haven't heard much reaction of that. I wanted to look up the exact quote from Jimmy Dunn. If they take 5 players a year in 5 years, they can gut us. That was a direct quote from Jimmy Dunn, and I think from a player's perspective, from a fan perspective, I think that opens a lot of eyes.
Yeah, some of the most salacious stuff that came out wasn't necessarily during the hearing, but it was deep in that document dump. And there was a memo titled, quote, Best of Both Worlds, which was essentially a proposal from the PIF side that included some pretty farcical ideas, Rex. You mentioned Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy taking ownership of separate LIV teams, each of them playing 10 LIV events a year. Obviously, Tiger Woods can't even play 3 or 4 major championships in a year. Among the other proposals included in the memo, there was a mixed gender LIV style team event. They'd be qualifying in Saudi Arabia, concluding in Dubai. They'd be getting world ranking points to LIV, including retroactively. PIF or Aramco, the oil sponsor, would be sponsoring 2 elevated events in the PGA Tour. One of those would be in Saudi Arabia. And yes, Yasser Al Rumayyan will receive membership to Augusta National. It's important to note, Rex, that these were mere proposals from the PIF side. Obviously, they were not included in the framework agreement that was announced to the public on June 6th, but potentially, I guess that they could be part of the definitive agreement if and when that is determined by December 31st. What was the goal here? If you're the PIF, was it just to see what the tour would agree to? Would it be to lay out what their plan is? Like, some of this stuff is like pie in the sky stuff. Like Tiger Woods playing 10 LIV events
10
per
events. Come on,
year.
he's not going to do it.
Right. But like, what's the goal that you would see from the PIF side for even kind of having that during the negotiations?
Well, if you look at the timeline, and I was just kind of glancing over it, so the first known contact, which I think it's funny how they put it that way, was in early April, and that was when Jimmy Dunn finally went to London and met with the governor of the PIF as well as some other financial folks. From there, it seems like PIF just started throwing things against the wall. Because at that point, and this was sort of arranged, it seems to me, reading that document, through an intermediary, someone here, someone in the UK, sort of reached out to Jimmy Dunn and wanted to try to get the two together. And I had heard, and I'm not even kind of circling back around and pretending I knew any of this was going to happen. I had heard rumblings as early as the Honda Classic, early in the Florida Swing, that Jimmy Dunn, who had just been named to the PGA Tour Policy Board, was going to play peacekeeper, that he was going to be the conduit between, my understanding was, players who wanted to come back, not necessarily some sort of merger or some sort of agreement between the two. Not a merger. I could just see Ron Price and Jimmy Dunn cringing every single time one of the senators.
Jimmy Dunn was not a fan of the rollout. He called it terrible, I believe was his language. Not good. I mean, it was bungled from the start. There was the press release that called it a merger. There was the cringeworthy CNBC interview, which if you go deep in this document, they call it a quote softball segment on CNBC when the two were paired together. Everything from the jump got this agreement off on a bad foot, and Jimmy Dunn made that very clear under oath today on Capitol Hill.
But to go back to your original assessment, I think what happened here is that they needed the door open. They just needed to get in the same room. And I'm talking about the PIF, the governor. And this was their way to doing it. I mean, Jimmy Dunn, if anyone was going to be able to accomplish this, Jimmy Dunn was the perfect person. If anybody listened to the hearing today, you heard how passionate he is about 9/11. I think the number is he lost 40% of his firm that day in that attack. And I mean, every single time I've heard him talk about it now, it's genuine emotion. Those aren't crocodile tears. I mean, he legitimately has a hard time hearkening back to that day and how difficult it was for he and his family. So for him to be the one that sat down, for him to be the one that was willing to sit down and try to broker some sort of peace is significant. And there's also the idea that I think from PIF's point of view, whatever conversation they could get started was going to lead to something like this. So yes, they were going to show up with all of these farcical ideas. I'm curious, like the only way we were ever going to know if Yasser gets that membership is if we see him under the tree with the green jacket on, right? I mean, they're not going to announce that.
That'd be the goal. Next April 2024, if Yasser is underneath the big oak tree with a green jacket, he will have successfully. He would have poured billions of dollars into disrupting golf, but he would have gotten the green jacket that he'd coveted all along. So the Tiger and Rory stuff obviously was a salacious news. That's already made headlines. It's important to note that was never part of the framework agreement. It seems incredibly unlikely that scenario would ever come to pass. However, that was at least in this document. The second part, Rex, which has made headlines, which I also thought was interesting, was that there was kind of this side agreement that was discussed ahead of the announcement, but the side agreement was never executed, in which Greg Norman would be replaced as LIV Golf CEO. And Senator Blumenthal actually followed up, thankfully, about 2 hours into this hearing. We're waiting for him to finally button up this point.
That was a good one.
And Ron Price, the COO of the PGA Tour, said under the framework agreement, if we are able to move the definitive agreement, the LIV Golf assets for which Greg Norman is the commissioner will move into a new subsidiary controlled by the PGA Tour. And so those events will be managed by the PGA Tour. And so, quote, it would make no sense to bring in that type of executive, meaning Greg Norman would be out of a job as commissioner or CEO of LIV Golf, could potentially be part of some sort of advisory role with the PIF, as was mentioned in the documents, Jay Monahan's talking points on June 4th. That should not be a surprise to anyone. He was not mentioned in the framework agreement. He's kind of been silenced over the past 5 weeks since this agreement was announced. But there has been at least some conversations on the LIV Golf side. Greg Norman's been a part of meetings. He's been seen photographed with Yasser, driving the golf cart for him. Is he finally being marginalized? Is he being kept in the loop on this? Do you think there's an end game here? What's your read on this, Rex? Because he still seems very much a part of the LIV Golf dealings, but it also on the same sense seems that the the PIF could be readying to dispose of him as well.
To your point, it seemed like it was nearly 3 hours of senators just wanting to hear themselves talk, and we don't
A lot
do
of
this very
grandstanding.
often. So, yeah, a lot of carnival barking, and so we don't do this very often. So I guess this is what we should have expected. The one thing that stood out, well, there was two things that stood out. That one, where I mean, the senators actually pressed Ron Price for. So what you're telling me is that if framework becomes definitive, we come up with some sort of new co, we pull up all these assets together. What happens to Greg? And the fact that he kept wrestling with him until he finally got the, well, there would be no need for that position, was the very polite way that he put it. And then I think there, at least in my mind, there was kind of a quiet hush, because that was a quiet thing out loud. I think all along people have thought, okay, this is going to be some sort of agreement that creates a version of Live Golf, but not Live Golf. And that means that Greg Norman will have to move on. Now, internally, from that side, I've heard different things. I mean, I think on the Live Golf side, there's a level of confidence after really the last couple of weeks where Yasser had been kind of outspoken with the idea that no, we're in this to stay. Greg had been kind of outspoken. It seemed like they'd both gotten on the same page. To hear that today in a hearing like this in such a public format, it was mind blowing to me. And the other question that actually stood out to me was,
but keep in mind, Rex, that was never part of the framework agreement, and two PIF officials told the Washington Post in the story that broke this document dump that they rebuffed the tour's proposal to have Greg Norman removed. And so I guess that's still TBD in a sense, right? Like I'm not sure that would be a kind of a deal breaker come December 31st. But it does seem like there's just not that particular role, but I guess he could be in sort of an advisory role with the PIF. That would not actually surprise me.
He could be. And look, the agreement calls for all of the for-profit assets from these three organizations, right? So what you would be talking about is you'd be talking about the PGA Tour, DP World Tour, and PIF. But the only golf assets that they have is going to be Live Golf. However, not once in the document does it say Live Golf. It says that it says that the tour will explore a team concept, but it never says that it'll look into how we get Live Golf under one umbrella. And so I think there's still
empirical
some wiggle room. Yes, but again, it never mentions Live Golf by name. You would imagine that the fact that these players are going to be part of the same organization, that it would be a version of this, but they never go out on a limb and say that. And the other thing that stood out to me, and this is kind of inside baseball stuff, but I'd had people sort of whisper it to me, Ed Hurley, who's the PGA Tour Policy Board member, who also, along with Jimmy Dunn, negotiated this deal. His law firm apparently is the one that kind of signed the deal on it. That's normally not that big of a deal, but it seems to me the Senators got caught up on that one really hard.
Perhaps understandably so, because there would be financial interest. Jimmy Dunn, of course, who spoke today, one of the two witnesses for the PGA Tour, said he had no financial interest, and he went to pains to say so. A couple of takeaways for me, Rex. Big picture, listening to this for 3 hours, poring over the documents. We obviously knew this, and the PGA Tour has reiterated this over the past 5 weeks. This is a framework deal, nothing more. They went to pains, understandably so, to say that nothing has been agreed to here. All they have done is agree to drop the litigation. In the framework agreement, it says the PGA Tour will have control and manage the events. And other than that, it was basically an agreement to say that they're going to talk in good faith before December 31st and try to hammer something out. I think it was interesting to hear so many times, if and when we can reach an agreement, if and when we can come to terms with the Saudis. They said that over and over again. Also, I think it was hammered home for me that the tour has so much more to lose here than the PIF does. Because if the PGA Tour cannot reach a deal, that is a massive loss. They've admitted publicly that LIV is an existential threat, that they could not survive, that they could not survive a long-term battle with the PIF, that this is unsustainable, that if they lose 5 stars a year, that would absolutely gut the tour, that LIV has, quote, set us on fire. Plus, they've already signaled that it's okay to accept Saudi money. The tour is planning on doing that now with the PIF as a minority investor. What's to stop the flood of defection and the defection of stars on the PGA Tour who were just alienated and blindsided by tour management? So if the tour cannot come to an agreement with the PIF, it's it's okay for the Saudis. They would just continue pouring money into LIV Golf as they would. They could resume the recruitment of PGA Tour players. But for the tour, sure, you could get outside investors, you could get private equity involved here, but you still can't match the $750 billion war chest that PIF has, and you'd continue these warring sides. You'd be back in the same position, competing against a bottomless pit. You just have the litigation drop. I think it's a massive risk for the PGA Tour, and they absolutely have to make this deal.
I don't know that they absolutely have to, because I don't think they're going to be able to accept a bad deal. Because as it was explained at length today, I mean, the framework agreement had to be agreed to in private, because the lawsuit was involved and there were things that they couldn't disclose. This one goes out in front of the whole world, essentially the policy board. So you got 5 players, you got 5 independent directors. The PAC's going to get involved and start hearing proposals here soon. The players aren't going to accept a bad deal. I mean, if suddenly you come back and something has changed dramatically and they don't like what they're hearing, I will tell you, up to this point, I think that the players are at least in let's call it a soft agreement to what this could possibly become. If you actually turn that around, then no, I don't think the players are going to agree to that. To your point, though, yes, it doesn't go well for the tour, because there is no motivation anymore to stay loyal. There's no more motivation to do the right thing, to be on the right side of history, whatever line you want to pull from the last year and a half. There's no reason to do that anymore. Now, you can go from the tour's perspective and say that, okay, they got rid of the lawsuit. That's one good one. And in theory, they're going to get an influx of money, a lot of money, which is also a good one. And
north of $1 billion is what CEO Ron Price said.
And look, they're trying to change this narrative, because this was part of the poor rollout that Jimmy Dunn referred to today. They will maintain control. And I bet I heard Ron Price say that at 3 hours about 1 billion times, because that's what they need to hammer home, that the way this is going to be structured, they will have control of that board of whatever NewCo is going to become. Now, the governor will be the chairman, and his voice will obviously carry a long way.
Money talks.
But money does talk. And if he's going to be pulling, now he's a minority investor. And I think from the tour's perspective, you can make an argument that the PIF is a minority investor in Uber. Like, no one's sitting here having these same conversations about Uber. So on that front, I can see how, yes, that this is just things that happen in business. The problem is this is an American institution. And I think the one interesting thing I heard from senators today is this opens the door to so many other things. Like, what's to stop the PIF from trying to buy an NFL team now? I mean, we would shake our head and say it's never going to happen, but they have Premier League teams, and they certainly have the money for it. So it does create an interesting option.
Yeah, this is bigger than golf. That was part of Senator Blumenthal's opening statement. He does anticipate more hearings. Jay Monahan, the commissioner of the PGA Tour, back in his capacity as commissioner on July 17th, having recovered from his medical issue. I think it's also worth pointing out that Congress can't actually stop this deal from happening. All they can do is put powerful people in uncomfortable positions and ask some pointed questions. But he did promise more hearings up ahead. It did kind of leave a bad taste in my mouth, Rex. Not just the bad questions about PGA Tour China, or the rambling story about how one of the senators shot like 217 in a round of golf. But this deal needs to be hammered out in private, not in a public setting, and 3-hour hearings for which these PGA Tour witnesses need to prepare for, because you're under oath and obviously receiving a kind of a public flogging of sorts. Like, that's taking time away from what could be used productively to actually make the best deal. And so I don't know. That kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. I don't know about you. Like, these things should be handled in private and not necessarily for the world to hear.
Well, and it was interesting. I mean, keep in mind, this hearing was called by Richard Blumenthal, the senator from Connecticut, the Democrat from Connecticut, and Ron Johnson, who's the Republican from Wisconsin. He's the ranking member on the committee. Ron Johnson was clearly on the PGA Tour side in all this. And I found it interesting.
It seemed like Ron Johnson wants that vacant policy board seat on the PGA Tour. He knew Wyndham Clark won the U.S. Open. He knew some of the tournaments. He knew the financial
impact. Does that qualify you for the board? Jesus. All right.
I mean, all you need to do is be a public figure with a vested interest in the game. It seemed like Ron Johnson was lobbying very hard.
No, and I think Rand Paul, and it split down party lines. I think Rand Paul probably was the most vocal person when it came to this, that the Senate has no constitutional power to get involved with professional golf or any sport for that matter. And so they feel, I think his line was, it was a show trial of a private organization. So you can see how these things are split. But I will say that what Ron Johnson came back to was your point. Let's let them finish this up in private. These deals are hard, and having to do it in under this much scrutiny makes it only that much more difficult. Let's let them finish it up, and then Congress and the DOJ and everyone else can dig in and get their piece of the pie and decide, okay, we like this or we don't like this.
Can you imagine, Rex, being a political reporter, having to deal with this political grandstanding every single day? There was no way I would survive 6 months of this, let alone 6 or 16 years. It was insane. I was bashing my head against the computer listening to this. The grandstanding, the kind of sanctimonious attitude, the interrupting, the performative aspects. Oh, it was just absolutely brutal.
PGA Tour Series China. Oh my! I kept coming back to that one.
It was just brutal to listen to, and like I would call myself an apolitical person, but having to listen to that day in and day out from people who may or may not know what they're talking about, oof, God, would just be absolutely brutal.
Well, no, to your point, I actually did cover state politics in Tallahassee, and that was pretty much my very first job straight out of college. And I thought that's what I wanted to do. And to your point is you have to learn to be an expert about everything every single day. Like, and it's always changing. Today, they had to show up and pretend to be experts about professional golf. But in the very next breath, you're having to be an expert about U.S. military subcontractors. And then the next day, it's about Department of Justice investigations. And it just never changes. And then I started kind of freelancing and covering FSU football games and realized that, oh, I don't have to reinvent the wheel every single day. I know football or golf or whatever the sport was.
It's the toy department.
Very easy.
It's the toy department. As my journalism professor at the University of Georgia, Conrad Fink, once called it, it's the toy department of the journalism section. Sports department is the toy department. And I was very happy to be part of that. I don't take myself very seriously, although this is obviously a very serious topic. Speaking of serious topics, Rex.
Is it?
Here's a segue. You have finally made it to Scotland. I believe this is roughly 18 hours after you were expected to be in Scotland. Do you mind sharing?
No, that's not right. It's got to be more than that. I was supposed to be here at 8:30 Monday morning.
Local time. It is now, you're recording this at 8 o'clock. 8
o'clock local time.
Yeah.
So let's make it 8 to make it easy. So that's 24 plus 12. So 36 hours after I should have gotten here.
That is truly that's truly a tough scene. Shout out Delta for getting you there safely.
No, don't do it. Don't do it.
If not your luggage. Is your diamond status imperiled, or are you looking at other suitors now?
No, and I'm not gonna do the unprofessional thing of naming names. I don't think that's the right way to do it. This added up to being 4 or 5 canceled flights, a lot of arguing on the phone line with the poor operators. All the operators out there I yelled at over the last 2 days. I am sorry. I know it's not your fault. Lost luggage. So what you see me wearing today, I'll be wearing. I mean, probably through the Open Championship would be my guess if I had to guess right off the top of my head. But the point I want to make here, and I'm just going to do this very, very quickly because we got a lot of other stuff to get to, though. If you own a company, and let's say that company makes widgets, and that company is called, I don't know, pick a name. You could go with Delta. Let's just call it Delta for that matter. And you have a very loyal customer that is a diamond customer. And
like as high as you can get.
And you treat that customer as poorly as I've been treated the last couple of days, I would imagine he's not going to be a customer any longer.
Wow, is that a threat?
You like all those hypotheticals?
With quote unquote Delta? I'm sad to hear that this relationship has been fractured, coming off a U.S. Open in which not just the front end but the back end featured canceled flights as well. I don't know what's going on with the airlines in the United States. I'm fearful. I do have a direct flight to Manchester next Sunday night. I mean, that should not pose any troubles, but who can say for sure? I'm a little bit hesitant. We're flying to Banff in early August for a big family vacation. That one could certainly be imperiled. I have like 4 stops for the Solheim Cup trip to Malaga,
That's going to
Spain.
be a
There is
disaster.
zero chance that
That'll be a
one
disaster.
comes to fruition. I think I'm supposed to get there Wednesday afternoon. They start play on Friday. I think I'll be rolling in straight from the airport, straight to the first tee of the Solheim Cup. So that's kind of what I'm anticipating. But I'm hopeful, Rex, that in a month's time, the airline industry can certainly shake itself out. Speaking of the Solheim Cup, I'm assuming you did not see Alison Corpuz, the 25-year-old Hawaiian, who the week began with kind of the celebration of Mashawi, and it's Alison Corpuz, who grew up kind of idolizing Mashawi and what she'd done in the state of Hawaii, winning the U.S. Women's Open at Pebble Beach. She kind of snuffed all the drama out of that championship and moved her to world number 6, first major championship, first victory on the LPGA. A very, very impressive performance. I don't think you watched that, so I will not grill you on that. Over on the PGA Tour, of course, Sepp Straka, proud Georgia Bulldog, go Dogs. Dogs hat is over here somewhere. He nearly Rex. He nearly frittered away everything here. He blew his chance at a 59. He almost blew the title at the John Deere, and he almost blew kind of getting thrust into the Ryder Cup picture. Instead, Sepp Straka's 62 was enough to win the John Deere Classic by 2 shots. It does move him into the top 30. It does make him now a virtual lock to reach the Tour Championship, provided that he continues to play well in the FedEx Cup playoffs. And it does put him on the radar for Captain Luke Donald on that European squad. What was your takeaway from the Deere, Sepp Straka, and anything else going on over in Silvas?
I thought it was interesting. I mean, going into the weekend, I had a feeling. So I was watching Cam Young because I'm thinking, you know what, he's finally going to do it. Like, of course, this would be the event where he does it, and there's not a lot going on. And then your boy Ludwig.
He wants to go by Ludwig.
So I got it right. All right, by accident. Aberg put himself right there in it. I mean, it's pretty impressive what he's been able to do. But everything pointed to Sepp, and I think it is impressive. I think we were having this Ryder Cup conversation a few weeks ago, and you brought up Sepp, and I almost probably rolled my eyes just because. First off, he's going to be the first Georgia Bulldog that dominates the Ryder Cup for the Europeans, which is going to be amazing. And Mark Schlabach is never going to be able to survive that Ryder Cup the way he's such a Georgia homer. And the other thing is I just don't see him in that context. I mean, he played college golf in the United States, and he's been on the PGA Tour for so long. I think the only time I've ever looked at him in that context was in Japan during the Olympics, and it dawned on me that, oh no, he's not.
He has a Southern accent. He's going to be the only one in the European Ryder Cup team room that has a Southern accent.
He's going to need subtitles. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. But like I think I remember that podcast. You did roll your eyes at the idea of Sepp Straka. You certainly rolled your eyes at the idea of Ludwig Aberg making that team. You and I
still roll my eyes on that one.
You and I did a draft. You said that Ludwig Aberg did not win enough. Your exact quote was, Ludwig Aberg does not win enough. Literally all he has done since then is won the Ben Hogan Award, became the first since John Rahm to win 2 Ben Hogan Awards as a top player. He won the Haskins Award as a top player. He was number 1 in PGA Tour University. He now has his tour card.
Winning tournaments. I'm not talking.
Yes,
come on. You know what I was saying.
He won regional tournaments. He won conference championships. He has done it all. All he's done since he got in the PGA Tour, Rex, is finished inside the top 25. The John Deere illustrated his best performance to date, final round 63, tied for 4th. How seriously are you taking the 23-year-old's chances of being a pick for that team?
I mean, I think when we look at the team, we did this for the U.S. team last week. We should probably start doing it for the European team right now. I mean, I think Luke's going to have to color outside the lines, because I think the argument I made for Zach Johnson in the U.S. team was, if you kind of went 1 through 12, I think Luke was going. I mean, I think Zach was going to be pretty happy with that team. That's not the case when it comes to Luke Donald. So I think outside of your Rorys and your Rahms, and there's going to be a couple where he can go back to, and okay, immediately, Victor Hovland, he's going to be on that team. But after that, let's say the second half of the roster, 7 through 12, I think he's going to have to be a little bit more experimental. And this is probably a good place for him to do it. You have a player that's showing up, that's clearly in good form, and you have a player that you could probably pair him with pair him with a couple of different guys. So I like his chances.
I like his chances as well. When you look at that European Ryder Cup team, all right, here's the locks, either through automatic qualification or just kind of no-brainer captain's picks. It's Rory, it's Rahm, it's Hovland, Fitzpatrick, Hatton, Fleetwood, Lowry, and Rose. That's 8. The way Adrian Meronk, who's in the field this week at the Scottish Open, has played, I think he's a safe bet for that team as well. That's 9 of the 12 spots that are accounted for. This is now kind of the territory where you could take some chances. You could have some flyers. You could have veteran presences. You could have kind of like an Alex Noren. You could go with a Rasmus Højgaard, who erased a 6-shot deficit on Sunday to win in Denmark. He, of course, is the more established Højgaard twin. I don't know if you need to put his twin brother Nikolai on the team to kind of make him whole, or whether you trust him to kind of go solo. He's clearly a good enough player. He's ranked inside the top 100 in the world ranking. I don't think he is necessarily dependent on being paired with his brother. Then you have a Sepp Straka. Yannick Paul right now is in position with a couple months remaining to nab one of those automatic qualifier spots. I think Ludwig Aberg, quite honestly, makes a ton of sense for this team. I don't even necessarily think it's that much of a flyer. I mean, he's a birdie machine. He's 23 years old. It's not like you're looking at a 19-year-old kid who's just kind of getting his feet wet professionally. He's very mature. He's turned heads with literally everyone he has played with, from Luke Donald to any prospective Ryder Cupper, even Cameron Young on the U.S. side, who had an opportunity to play with him a couple of weeks ago, was thoroughly impressed. I actually anticipate that Ludwig Aberg is going to be on this European Ryder Cup team. I think it'd be a great pick. And I don't even think he's necessarily a player that you're just kind of stashing on the bench and hope that he plays 1 or 2 sessions. I think if his play continues to be as torrid as it is, I think you could trot him out there for 3 or 4.
I mean, we'll see. It's certainly going to be the case. And look, I don't know that he has the luxury of being able to hide a bunch of guys, because the way this is going to shape up, he's going to have to put these guys. I mean, the Højgaards would be the primary example. Like, you'd love to give them a chance to sort of ease their way into their first Ryder Cup, but I don't think Luke doesn't have that luxury. I think just the makeup of the team, the way Liv Goff sort of fractured what he had, I think it's going to force him to be a little bit more aggressive than he wanted to be, and that might not be a bad thing.
I mean, he's got 8 dudes. He's got 8.
He might have 9 dudes. To your point, I think Meronk would probably be a 9th dude.
Yeah, but he's when I say he's got 8 dudes, he's got 8 dudes who are proven, who are championship caliber players.
What's the difference between a dude and a stud? If we're going to break it down, so like he's probably only got 2 or 3
I think
studs.
is based more on potential.
Oh,
dudes.
I was going to go the other way.
He's got 8 dudes that he can absolutely roll with. No questions asked. Doesn't have any hesitation in doing so. You know what you're going to get with a Shane Lowry or a Justin Rose or a Tommy Fleetwood, right? Like there's no babysitting those guys. They know how to conduct themselves. A Ludwig Aberg is probably going to be a little bit wide-eyed, right? In that certain scenario, but he'd be a stud. He'd be a guy who I'd want to roll with, who I would want to stake my claim to. If I'm going to go down, I want to have my absolute best most talented players on that roster, and Ludwig Aberg would be among them. If a Bobby McIntyre can kind of catch fire over these next couple of months, a former winner at Marco Simone, I think that would be a great fit for Captain Luke Donald as well. Rex, speaking of
I got a great idea for a segment, actually. Now that you've gone through that, we could do like a weekly segment between now and Rome. You could do Ryan Labner's Ride or Die Ryder Cup picks. Go with it.
Oh,
you could just do Ride or Die and do Ride or Die.
Ride, like RYDE.
That's right.
Do you think they could sell that to like Yamaha, Mitsubishi?
Sure. Yeah. Now you're thinking.
Sales team. Hope you're listening.
That's
Still looking for that grill sponsor as well. Rex, what did you eat in your first night in Scotland, and what are you most looking forward to this week with the Scottish Open?
Bunkmate reminded me, because I was complaining about the food again, like I always do on my way over here, and she reminded me that you get the same thing everywhere you go. And so, of course, it's not good, but you continue to get the same thing. I got a hamburger because I needed to eat quickly, and I hadn't eaten for 18 hours. And I need to do the podcast. I need to do a hit later on tonight, 10:30 tonight, my time, for Golf Central. So I've got a lot of things going on. But it wasn't bad. I'm staying in Gullen, which is sort of on the opposite side of North Berwick as far as the Renaissance Club, where they're playing the Scottish Open. And as you can see, it's right on the golf course. Gullen's an awesome golf course. It's a really cool track. But there's a kids course that I got to walk across, and then it's called the Old Clubhouse. So I was there having dinner, and probably I told you before we came on, but it was one of the lighter moments that I've had in a couple of days now, where I walked in and there was a group of PGA Tour officials sitting at one table, and I had to do a double take and out loud to everyone in the bar. That is a glum-looking group right there.
Could be worse. As I said earlier, they could have been on Capitol Hill getting absolutely grilled about PGA Tour China. As of right now, 8 p.m. in Scotland, Jordan Spieth, Justin Thomas, and Smiley Kaufman are playing my favorite course in the world at North Berwick. That just absolutely makes me incredibly depressed. Where are you hoping to tee it up in the next week and a half?
Berwick, hopefully I can play Gullen, and then we have a colleague of ours at SI, Bob Herrick. He wants to play. There's another course on the other side of North Berwick in Berwick. I'm trying to remember the name of it right now, but he's heard really good things. So I'm going to try to get a couple rounds in this week if I get my club. So,
sounds very TBD as it pertains to Delta. Shout out to Tina and Jason, who got me fit for a new set of Titleist irons. They just arrived. My God, they're absolutely beautiful. To the point that I'm actually afraid to take them out of the packaging. I am going to play on Friday, and then we'll reassess at that point whether I'm going to be bringing my clubs to England. Not sure with the time crunch whether we'll have time to do so. Fingers crossed. However, it is my favorite week of the year. I know everyone says can't wait to get to Augusta, but as the saying goes, can't wait to get there, can't wait to leave.
Can't wait
when it comes to the Open Championship. That is a trip that I wish would last for a week or two. It's absolutely my favorite week of the year. You and I staying in a 2-bedroom flat about a mile from the golf course, walking to and fro Royal Liverpool, Hoylake, arguably the best course on the open road. I can't wait. The forecast is calling for significant rains. So perhaps I will be stocking up on some Gore-Tex shoes, which I've been meaning to invest in.
It's interesting. I will point out, I did not have faith that my Legos was going to make it based on what was happening. So this time around, I actually did pack like a couple extra items just in case. So I will survive. You guys will see me still wearing this for the next couple of days. But the one thing that did go in the carry-on were the slicks. The rain slicks had to come along because it's going to be a very wet and wild few weeks.
Buddy, need you in a FootJoy sponsored slick, my friend. Make sure you check Rex. He'll be doing the tournament interviews from a Genesis Scottish Open on the PGA Tour. It'll be on Golf Channel. Also, his hits will be on Golf Central and Golf Today. I'm assuming, have not checked the broadcast times, but it is this Rex in a Solheim Cup Ryder Cup year. That's going to be number one for me. This is like the second best fortnight of the year. Coffee golf season, Scottish Open leading into the Open Championship, like the absolute best time of year. At this point, we're downhill to the FedEx Cup playoffs, and then football season, barbecue season. It's the most wonderful time of year.
This is the last month without any kind of football in it. When I saw that on Twitter the other day, and it made me smile so much.
We're making some preparations over here at the Lavner household with football season upon us. Just got some new flags to hang in the outdoor kitchen, both the Jaguars, for which we have season tickets this year, as well as the Georgia Bulldog flag will be going up above the entry. Obviously, you know that my offset smoker is due to arrive thanks to Chris Gentry in late August. Can't wait to get that. Today was Amazon Prime Day, which I'm sure Bunk is well aware of. And so we're making some purchases there, potentially a wood rack, reaching out to folks on Facebook Marketplace to stockpile some oak and hickory. So it has been big happenings in the Lavner household, making sure that everything is ready to go for football season. We'll be dialing in the recipes, trust me, after the Open Championship with a couple weeks to spare before the FedEx Cup playoffs. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Golf Channel podcast with Rex and Lav. Make sure you check them out at the Scottish Open. We will be reunited in the flat in England next week. We'll be doing the preview podcast as we always do, as well as the mini pods after each and every tournament round of the Open Championship. The Open Championship, by the way, heading to Birkdale in 2026 as it was announced on Tuesday. All right, that's going to do it. We'll talk to you guys next week.